Hello, welcome to episode 4 of the Blame Game. I've got Nathan here, and we've got a special guest. So, Nathan, can you introduce yourself and our guest, please?
Sure. So I'm Nathan. I'm with Paxate Academy. I work with MSPs, technology businesses to improve their projects, service delivery, capability within their leadership, good processes, better ways of working, things like that. And today we're joined by Jon from ScopeStack, the CEO, who we're really excited to have on today. Jon, you want to talk about yourself a little bit?
No, I don't, but I will since you asked. But yeah, so my name is Jon. I'm one of the co-founders over here at ScopeStack. Live the world of working with sales, scoping and delivering projects, and just all the good and the bad that happens in that whole process. So thanks for having me.
Yeah, great to have you. And your background is a lot across the pre-sales side of things as well, right? So you'll be the glue in between, or the
yeah. So I was
sandwich.
oftentimes I'm the meat in the sandwich. Yeah. So I was oftentimes the one that was coming in, and sales said, "Hey, we can do X, Y, and Z." I would come and say, "No, we can only do A, B, and C," and then we'd come up with A, B, and Z. And so. Yes, I was always in the middle trying to, work with the sales team to make sure that we were crafting the right solution at the end of the day for the client.
It's an interesting point. How often would that, where expectations or the idea of what we're going to be doing is completely different or not, particularly valid to the organization we're working with, how often is there already a commitment there that you have to work backwards on from your experience?
I think a lot of it comes from just the qualification that's been done by the sales and the account team. That's a big part of it, making sure that, they're asking intelligent questions. They know in general what are some of the high level information we need to know in order for it to be worth having a pre-sales engineer, right? Like folks like yourself, Nathan, were the most expensive part. I mean, the most valuable part of an organization. So so we had to make sure that, right, we were choosing the right conversations to invest in. And I'd say, really good AEs, account managers, I never had any problems with that. The ones that were truly learning, how to navigate that client conversation expectation world, it was okay, let me learn more about that type thing coming in as a pre-sales engineer, but you never wanted to shut anything down. You never wanted the AE to look like they asked all the wrong questions, right? You're on the same team at the end of the day. So I'd say 50-50.
Yeah. And on the same team thing is definitely something that, we're talking through a lot. I'm talking with partners a lot, and that's why we started this podcast to start with. What kind of questions, when you're going through the qualification stage for an account manager or a business development manager or someone in sales, should they be gathering as a base minimum? Because obviously we can't account for every situation that comes up and every scenario.
Sure, yeah.
But what gives a pre-sales person something that they can run with that's feasible, realistic, that hasn't already sold them down the wrong road?
Yeah, I mean, I think at a bare minimum, there are some very high level just qualifications outside of just the technology that we're talking about that you should talk through. Like, are we talking to either a champion or a decision maker? Do they have a budget for it? Is there urgency? So like, why would they choose us out of anyone? Or just like, I always found myself in like an RFP. We should respond to this RFP. Like, were you a part of building the RFP? If you weren't, then maybe we shouldn't respond to it. Right. And then just, like, is it a priority? Whatever we're doing, is it a priority? And then I think, where you can really set yourself apart as like an AE or an account manager is kind of having some of that technical aptitude where you say, okay, if we're talking data center migration, then I know I need to have an idea around, a couple of different things, like where are you coming from? Where do you want to go? Applications, right? Like you have a surface level understanding of what the technologies are and what they can accomplish. But again, the expectation is not for you to understand, right, the level of detail, Nathan, that you would understand coming in, having done this and doing this every single day. So I think if you can come to that conversation, you're like, hey, they want to pull the trigger on working with us, right, in the next 30 to 60 days. I'm talking to the right person. This is a big priority. It's their number one priority. You're like, oh, I'm all in. We'll make it work.
Okay. With that, understanding the technology at a base level, it has some upsides and some downsides if people start going down rabbit holes or, one solution fits all and we try and drop it in. Should there be a playbook with some of the things that we have at our disposal for qualifying some of those things? If this, consider this, if this, et cetera, or should it really just be chucked straight over to pre-sales from there?
No, I think they're absolutely. I'll stop and say, I think it depends based on the level of maturity that an MSP or an ITSP brings to the table, right? So like very mature organizations, right? I think the ideal scenario is I have a checklist, like you're just saying, like, are we talking security, cloud, productivity, what are you going to call it? Everyone calls them different things, but like based on that general categorization, I have some checklist or some questions that I can answer. And like, the Mecca's, hey, if I answer these questions, then I can actually get like recommended services, right? Based on how I answer those questions, which are based on standards and stuff like that. Like that's the end all be all. However, I think, just again, like that's like technology specific checklist. I think if you just had some standards as a starting point or a consistent checklist with like what questions I need to ask to qualify the opportunity, I think that's even better than nothing. But in terms of your playbook around, hey, I found this opportunity to qualifying this opportunity, knowing when to get my very valuable resources engaged, right? Like you have to have a clear understanding, like when those things happen, like what are the gates and what are the requirements to pass through those gates.
So it's not a script, because scripting for sales doesn't work.
Yeah.
It's a great idea, but
we're thinking, so we're basically like the pre-sales team is going to need the answers to these questions. So however you get those answers, if you know the answers because you happen to know this particular business very well that you're selling into, or if it's been answered in previous things, but if you can answer these questions, then we can move ahead with the quoting or the scoping. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I think 100%, right? And from a sales standpoint, I think what gets a pre-sales engineer excited or engaged in opportunity is understanding that this is kind of an imminent need. This is a priority, like all those things I was talking about earlier. You have a clear understanding of like where the client wants to go in terms of like business outcome, right? And we can come and like, again, before you even go into that meeting, we like the sales and pre-sales should have a conversation, whether it's in the car ride, whether it's in the walk-in from the car, right? Like something around, because I've done all of those before. But just something around, hey, this is what to expect, right? Some sort of internal briefing. Because the worst thing you can do is get in there and start asking the exact same questions that the salesperson already asked. Like it's a terrible experience for the client. And it's a terrible experience for us internally as well, right? On the sales and pre-sales, because it looked like we didn't talk at all. Not even on the car, not even on the car ride in.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's definitely a valid point, and I see that not just from the pre-sales side as well, but from the projects where we may have asked all these qualified questions, and we've gone and taken site photos, or we've been provided blueprints, or a whole bunch of different things that may have happened. Sure. We've had all these conversations, and they're sitting in the sales or the pre-sales engineers' inbox, and that's all that it is. Come project time and project kicks off 3 months down the line, we're going and asking the exact same questions again, but it's not even in that initial, kickoff or pre-kickoff briefing type scenario. It's 2 months into the project. Hey, what are the dimensions of the site? We need to fix the
oh,
put
I
in the
have that
Wi-Fi access.
in my
Yeah.
inbox.
Yeah. So
it's always those seams, right? Like I heard someone talk about this one time. Like it's the seams where things are the weakest, right?
Yeah.
So you think about clothes, you think about whatever you want to use the analogy for, but like that handoff, to your point, Nathan, it's like those are the areas where things will go wrong. So like you have to be super intentional about that handoff. And I'm I don't think any of us, because we've done this before, right? Like we're not saying it's easy, but we're saying it's important.
Yeah. So what's your experience with this and how to get at least people playing from the same book, looking at the same information in the same place? So I often recommend using SharePoint or Teams, creating something as it becomes an opportunity, and you convert it from a sales to a project. You just update or rename the team, or you have a folder structure in SharePoint. But every correspondence, every piece of information should sit in the same place, and then you link it into your PSA. So you're not having to do document management in a PSA where you've got 100 images and you don't know what anything is. What's worked for you in the past there?
No, I mean, I think, whether it's SharePoint or some other kind of file repository, like having that and having a consistent folder structure, because again, you don't want Billy and Tommy each, creating their own folders necessarily, but like, you probably know better than I do, like there are some really smart ways we can leverage like building a folder structure every time we create a new project or a new client. And like, if there's anything in there, like that's where it goes. And whether you're driving that through some sort of automation integration or you're manually putting it there, it's coming from the CRM. I think that is the best way to store data, right? I think having a clear understanding of who is responsible for collecting that data, I think is another important piece. So from a sales standpoint, they might need to collect a few things from the pre-sales, right? You mentioned if we're going to do like, wireless survey, like, hey, I can collect the floor plans. I can collect, honestly, if you can collect as much information up front so that you can scope and build a better solution, the better. That also shows that post-sales engineering team that, hey, you're not just like throwing them to the sharks. Like you've put in some effort to make sure that we have the right details. And then again, like if, it's a great way, like to go back to the client and say, hey, you never gave us this information, or what you gave us was inaccurate based on what we try to deliver. Like, having clear understanding, like who should be collecting that information, I think is equally as important as where you store it, in my opinion. But the where you store it is also important too.
Yeah, definitely. Because there's a lot to be said with gathering and validating that information and how it ties into your out of scope items, right?
That's a huge,
huge part. Yeah.
Like, hey, you gave me a floor plan that showed 100,000 square feet. I showed up and we're talking 2 buildings, each 100,000 square feet. They happen to have the exact same floor plan, right? Like, there's just, you got to be careful. And you're right. I mean, that's a spot on reason for calling out what you're not doing, which I'm sure we'll get into, or that's another video potentially.
Yeah, it's probably another video, but it would be as a general rule, when we are going through validation, discovery, qualification, we are dealing with a lot of unknowns, and how do we know what we don't know? You can't anticipate everything that's going to go wrong or everything that's going to cover off. What's some of the things from your perspective, being in that position where you are the glue? Some would say you're even that seam that you were talking about in some respects, to protect yourselves from that.
I think it kind of goes back to a previous point. So I think it's equally as important, like knowing what you should know, meaning what questions do I need to answer, right? So if I have what I need to answer, if we start veering outside of that, then it's kind of fair game to ask that question and a follow up and bringing in the engineering team, right? Because they're more accurate, more detailed questions, and they have a little more context on why we need to know maybe that something wasn't in our checklist. So like knowing what you should know, it's okay to say you don't know, right? And get that answered before we start scoping out a project. Like I remember when I first started in pre-sales, I always had this impression that I was going to be the guy in the room that knew I had to know everything.
Yeah.
Right? Like they start challenging you on speeds and feeds, and no one ever did. Maybe one time in like 15 years did anyone ever challenge me on that. And I was just like, you know, I don't know. Like, and it's okay to say that, right? Like,
Yeah.
I don't think anyone expects you to know every single intricate detail of it. Like, you need to know where you're trying to go, right? So, what are you trying to achieve as a business? And that was something that, you know, as I was leaving other services organizations, like really giving that training and education to the pre-sales team around business outcomes, right? I've talked to some of your counterparts about that too. Is like, right? It's no longer about just the technology. It's about how are we trying to help their business? You know, and that's like a really good conversation for your sales counterpart to play a part of also. Like that's not just a pre-sales thing. That's a collective.
Yeah.
How do we service this account thing? So I don't know if I answered that. Like, you know, security being a big part of it too, right? Like, are there any specific security requirements based on the vertical of the client we're talking to? Just components like that are like, hey, I want to at least ask the question.
Yeah, legal, regulatory. I've inherited a project once where it was like that. They went through all the validation questions, and New Zealand's got specific laws with that get impacted with storing data offshore and things like that. And they said, no, we're not applicable to that. Comes about 2 days before go live, and they've mentioned that, you know, a couple of government agencies have been in touch recently around what they're doing to keep their data inshore. And that's one of those, it's an unknown. We've gone through and validated it, but sometimes those things come up.
Yeah.
As well.
Yeah. I mean, that's what, kind of getting back to what you said around what's out of scope.
Yeah.
Right. That might be out of scope at that point. And, you know, and I think just alignment on expectations is a huge thing. So, right. I mean, you can, there's analogies around marriage and other sorts of relationships, but like you might have an idea of what you think is going to happen in terms of how this project is delivered, what you're trying to achieve. The client might have another, unless you just verbalize them or say, hey, what do you expect for this, right? Just, it sounds like a cheesy question, but at the end of the day, it's really powerful, because the client might say, oh, I'm just expecting you to move these files from AWS to GCP, right? And you, in your mind, because we over-engineer stuff, of course, we're like, I'm going to build out entire data centers everywhere we're going, and then you give them a proposal or a statement of work.
Architecture and everything like that. Yeah.
And it's like $50,000. There's like, I just wanted you to move some files.
Lift and shift.
You know, just asking the question.
It's a great point too, because I know, when I was in senior consulting roles and things like that, you do have this expectation on yourself that they ask me anything, I need to know the answer. But it's often, well, I'd say generally more risky to have someone who's pretending they know what the expected outcome is than someone who's asking it. Even if you do think that they're going to look at you a little different, they're probably not, because there is so much to know about technology. And I think it's a really important thing for people in sales, pre-sales, engineers, senior engineers, to not always expect that you will have all the answers, and that's not an expectation on you. And if you have that expectation on you, everyone else that's looking up to you for leadership or guidance, clients and within your own business, if they have that expectation of themselves as well, we're going to have more and more, you know, mistakes. People are going to be working from a place of ignorance rather than validation. So really,
I mean, I think
important.
One of the most powerful tools in pre-sales is asking questions. You know, I mean, you need to ask intelligent questions around the area that you're asking, you know, not just ask questions just to ask them, but, you know, ask pointed questions around specific areas, like where you see the solution going, or based on the business.
Start open, get more closed, right?
100%.
Nice. Cool. Well, I reckon we've probably covered off enough for today. I think we'll definitely get you back for another conversation. There was a couple of points that I'd like to dive into a little bit more at a later point.
Yeah, would love to.
What's your takeaway piece of advice for MSPs looking to scope their projects better?
Yeah, I mean, I think my takeaway piece of advice is don't try to boil the ocean. Start with getting clarity around which solutions you're good at delivering and get really good at those. So define some standard solution offerings. With that, define what a checklist would look like that we talked about. So what questions do you need to get answered? Then start laying in, okay, well, how would we price a solution like that? What's some good starting point of language or statement of work? Right? Because again, at the end of the day, it's not my impression. I'm sure it's not y'all's impression. Like every project is the same, because it's not. But I think starting from the same point is really powerful. And I think you can get sales, pre-sales, and post-sales in the same room to answer all those questions I was just saying. So like, what are the ones we do really good at? What questions are important? Get engineering, pre-sales engineering involved in defining that, and say, hey, when we start talking about Exchange migrations, this is what you can expect from sales, pre-sales, and post-sales. And, it might feel like you're going backwards at times because you're slowing down to speed up.
Yeah.
But again, don't overdo it either. Don't try to again, a lot of MSPs are started by engineers, right?
Yeah.
And so don't over engineer it. Don't try to get crazy with it. Just start with something, document it.
Yeah.
That was like 10 pieces of advice, but so I'm sure someone can get one out of it.
Yeah.
Pick one and get started with that one.
Yeah.
I really like the don't over engineer it as well. I've worked as a salesperson in MSPs, and engineers can over engineer their business processes, and approach the sales cycle from a very engineering heavy standpoint, which is sometimes really good and sometimes needs a bit of balance.
Yeah.
Yep. Totally agree.
Yeah. Don't under engineer and over engineer your scopes is the main things. I want to talk about Parkinson's law at another point, and just the result of what happens from that. But all great advice, and a lot of those problems are problems that happen in most businesses, and that's what ScopeStack's also around to do. So it's great having you in here to talk around how you can address some of these things, and also just from talking to you today, I think seeing how you are addressing and leveraging some of that knowledge and those problems and needs in your app itself. So
I appreciate it. I mean, it came from a world of having this exact problem right everywhere I worked, and we had spreadsheets and Word templates just like everyone else in the world does, and we didn't want to be proposal automation because that was out there. We didn't want to be quoting because that was out there. But there was just a problem around our particular use case of pre-sales, which is the best job in the world because we get to spend other people's money, and solving specifically that, because it was just like you talk about the seams, and you'd have CRMs in a cloud-based environment, PSAs in cloud-based, and you have this offline world where no one knew what was going on. And so if we can insert now ScopeStack and kind of create a better process around that, it seemed like the right thing to do. So yeah, really excited. I love talking about this kind of stuff, so anytime you'd like me to talk about it, I'd be glad to.
Yeah, great. All right, cool. Well, it's been great having you, Jon.
Thanks, Nathan. Appreciate it. Thanks, Maria.
Thank you. We will catch up another time. Thank you all.
Sounds good.